New York in the 80s was this fabulous, sort of shimmering melting pot of all this money and power, and at the same time, it had a dark edge.
New York City, it is a paradox.
It may be what made it, in a way, so fascinating, it was to me anyway, that it was either the limo or the sort of the sidewalk with a lot of homeless people around and a sense of that other side. I came to New York in 1984 from London to take over Vanity Fair magazine. Every great magazine defines its era and is defined by its era. It was a fantastic cast of characters in the 80s. You know, you have in Reagan a president who was an actor, with Nancy, who was the big socialite. So they set the social pace, and a lot of social characters got thrown up so that the world of sort of Park Avenue dinner parties and Bel Air socializing and so on became really of interest to people. There was also all of these big fortunes being made, you know, on Wall Street. So you suddenly had all this huge kind of, you know, money, power, trophy wives, that phrase that came to be in the 80s. And that's the kind of energy, in a way, that New York in the 80s was all about. I think the combination of having a president who was a celebrity and the ascendance of all of this Wall Street money created so much energy for coverage of you know, magazines starting, periodicals starting, hungry for material to make these people colorful. This was the beginning of making CEOs celebrities, which they really weren't before. Before they were just boring people who sat behind desks that you didn't want to write about. Now all of a sudden they're like posing with like Manhattan skylines behind them, like thrusting themselves, you know, over the desk. Donald Trump was really the great 80s figure. He really was. I extracted his first book, The Art of the Deal, in Vanity Fair.
Trump, it's taking on new meaning. Tycoon, billionaire, maverick. It's written all over New York and Atlantic City, and now it's on the cover of a book.
I wrote in my diary at the time, it's bull, but it's authentic bull. His building, Trump Tower, was in a way the perfect signifier of the 80s, with its fool's gold facade and that crazy Hollywood waterfall in the lobby. It was extravagant, it was ostentatious, it couldn't be ignored. All of these things really were all about the 80s in a way that made it the ultimate cultural signifier. And Trump, therefore, became, in a way, the symbol of the 80s.
People come up to me and they say, "Oh, Donald, you're so lucky, everything just falls into place for you." And it's not that way at all. You have to make it fall in place. And
he was obviously far more of an outrageous character than most of the other big players at the time. I mean, we have all these big Wall Street figures like, you know, Boesky and Henry Kravis and Carl Icahn, and, you know, there was the whole kind of, you know, insider trading gang and all of that. But Trump was the most colorful, and of course Ivana and he together were the ultimate glitzy duo who were out every night and who you could not miss. Once CEOs realized that they could be on the covers of magazines, they wanted them. It then became not enough to be in the Fortune 500. I mean, you wanted to be the face of your company. And so businessmen started to use their own images in ads. And of course, the ultimate example of that was, of course, Leona Helmsley with her advertising campaign, you know, and with the hotel where the Queen stands guard, right? She was just the perfect 80s figure when she made a comment that, you know, paying taxes is for the little people. You know, wow, such a great line. I think the Trumps and the Helmsleys and so on, they did sort of pervert the idea of what was appropriate anymore for rich people to present as. I mean, it's one thing to have been extravagant in the walls of your own home, but to be so ostentatious about it, it was just over the top. And it was all over the top, all the time. I do think that created a kind of a toxic wind in the end that was ripe to blow up, and maybe hasn't really ever quite recovered from, because this whole concept of wealth that is so beyond just being rich, you know, it started the big sort of inequity snowball that we now find ourselves really in with a vengeance. I mean, these fortunes were enormous and people wanted to know that you had them, and that created a lot of animosity that was building up, I think, amongst the American people over years. It's just like these people were really uncontrolled and out of bounds. I think, the obvious outcome, the inevitable outcome of celebrity culture has been where everybody is their own, quote, brand. I think a lesson from the 1980s cannot choose the moment when you're famous. Once you're famous, you're famous. And you see time and again how people who've craved and hustled and clawed for that exposure, celebrity, and so on, suddenly are giving interviews going on about how much they hate their fame and celebrity because exposure can burn.